freeform. And Lee?
I'm muted, yes. Welcome, everyone. I am Lee Cook, and on behalf of UUCA's Climate Action Team, our adult RE, and in collaboration with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, it is my pleasure to introduce the first of our three-part series on environmental justice, Environmental Justice 101. First, I'd like to give a brief rundown of how the meeting will go. We'll have the EJ presentation first, runs about 40 minutes. And then we will have 20 minutes in breakout sessions to discuss provided questions by Georgia Interfaith Power and Light. Then a regroup for about 15 minutes for Q&As with GIPL and everybody. And then I'll do about a 5-minute wrap up at the end. So this series is the result of a great collaboration with Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, or GIPL, that began last year when the Climate Action Team, or CAT, began working with them to organize UUCA's Green Team. This series is a part of our commitment as a Green Team to qualify UUCA as a recipient of a PowerWise grant from GIPL. After a lot of hard work, spearheaded by the CAT's chair, Bert Pierce, this led to the successful award of a PowerWise grant from GIPL for Project Phoenix. And now it's my distinct pleasure to introduce tonight's presenter, Hannah Shultz, excuse me, who is the program associate for GIPL, where she manages GIPL's signature programs, PowerWise and WaterWise, as well as GIPL's Green Team coaching program. She works directly with congregations to assist with developing sustainable practices and spaces, launching a green team, or taking environmental action in their communities. Hannah received her Master's of Divinity from Candler School of Theology at Emory University, and a BA in the Anthropology of Religion from Juniata, is that right? College. Please welcome Hannah.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you all for inviting me to speak tonight and GIPL to help with this environmental justice series. We're really excited about the next 3 weeks and the opportunity to connect with all of you. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute, and I have a presentation to share. Like June said, if you have questions, I'd invite you to drop them in the chat during the presentation. I probably won't look at the chat and address them during the presentation, but we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. So that'll give me a chance to look at your questions, and then we can answer them and talk about them at the end of tonight's session. So thank you all again so much for having me tonight. Give me just a second to get my presentation pulled up. Okay, can you all see this? Okay, great. And I have some videos throughout, so I'll trust that you all will let me know if you can't hear sound when we get to those videos. So again, my name is Hannah Shultz. I'm the program associate at Georgia Interfaith Power and Light, and I'm excited to be here to talk to you all tonight about environmental justice. So today we will cover what is environmental justice. Why should we care? The history of the environmental justice movement. We'll talk about some top environmental issues identified by the EPA, some of the environmental justice priorities here in Georgia. We'll talk a little bit about some organizations in the state that are doing the work of environmental justice. And then we'll end by talking a little bit about what we can do both as individuals and as a congregation. So just to start, what is environmental justice? It is the idea that all people and communities, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income have the right to equal environmental protection under law and the right to live, work, and play in communities that are safe, healthy, and free of life-threatening conditions. So basically, it's the idea that communities shouldn't be forced to deal with more pollution or toxic waste just because they belong to a certain race, national origin, or income bracket. We know that low-income communities, people of color, the elderly, and children disproportionately suffer the economic and environmental impacts of pollution and other environmental issues. Environmental racism, similarly, is any policy, practice, or directive that affects or disadvantages, whether intended or unintended, individuals, groups, or communities based on race. And I wanted to start by sharing this video because I think it does a really nice job kind of orienting you towards what environmental justice is.
Okay, so this is a city. Here are all the people living in it, people of all different colors, ages, wealths, and incomes. Except they don't all live together in the same place. They're separated into different parts of the city by what color they are, what language they speak, and how much money they have. And those different parts of the city look quite different. The parts that are whiter and wealthier tend to have green spaces, grocery stores with nutritious organic food, and of course the money to buy it, and are often far away from pollution-emitting freeways. The parts that are poorer and more diverse tend to have industrial sites, heavy-duty diesel-polluted ports and highways, and hazardous waste, all things that the city relies on to run properly, but that heavily pollute the air and water. And even if they had those grocery stores with nutritious organic food, most residents there couldn't afford it anyway. How did this happen? Well, this segregation can be traced back to race-based zoning and housing policies, but it wasn't always as deliberate as plain old racism. Some separations can simply be traced to poor land use planning. And as a result, these residents of the same city live very different lives. Say the city realizes it has an emissions problem. It comes up with a plan to reduce air pollution, plant more trees to suck up the carbon, or start a cap-and-trade program. But those trees get planted in the neighborhoods that are already green, and the factories that are spewing toxins into the air just buy more carbon offsets and keep spewing their toxins. The benefits of these programs are enjoyed by the communities that are already doing just fine, and the communities that were hurting most from all that air pollution, well, they're still hurting. This isn't just an imaginary city, this is the story of real cities all across the US where people might live in the very same area code, but their race, ethnicity, or wealth and income bracket causes them to experience wildly different quality of air, water, and life. In fact, it can even mean that they also experience different deaths. That's how serious this stuff is. This kind of inequity expands far beyond cities, too. Rural areas are full of commercially valuable resources like oil and coal, and they're also home to indigenous and low-income communities. But when those resources are extracted, those communities don't see any of the money, and they end up with all the air and water contamination that's left over from the extraction. And we even see this injustice on a global level, like in small island nations that are forced to directly confront the consequences of rising sea levels, but haven't played any significant role in the industries that are causing climate change. These peoples are sometimes forced to flee their homes because their land is literally going underwater. But the very states that did play a hand in creating climate change don't have migration policies to accommodate them. So when we talk about environmental justice, we're talking about how we can try to break down and reimagine a system that's built up on these inequities. A system where those who are already disadvantaged because of their race and economic status are made poorer because they're unable to profit from the resources that the world depends on, and are made sick or worse by the environmental contamination that comes with extracting those resources. Social inequities are intimately tied to the environment. That's why social justice is an environmental issue too.
Okay. So I really like that video, and I'm glad that it ends on this intersection between social and environmental justice, because I think that that is An integral part of our work at GIPL is recognizing that all justice work is intersectional. Social and environmental justice cannot be achieved without the other. And so we believe that caring for creation requires us to look at how the environmental impacts are not only impacting the earth itself, but communities and neighbors on the earth. We believe that justice for creation cannot be achieved without fully addressing the environmental injustices impacting our neighbors and communities. As people of faith, we are called to do the work of justice. Justice is one of GIPL's 4 faith principles. Climate change, we know, is going to continue to affect the earth for generations to come, and often it's the communities that are least able to adapt who are going to be most affected. So we believe that it is our responsibility to advocate for dismantling the systems that perpetuate environmental injustice, environmental degradation, and climate change. Although there's a lot that we can do as individuals, there are some systemic issues that can't be solved outside of local, state, and federal policy work. And so that's a big part of what we do at GIPL is getting involved with advocacy opportunities and talking about policy priorities. And I'll talk a little bit about some of those today. So this is a little theological orientation for why we care about this work of environmental justice at GIPL. So I want to spend some time talking about the timeline of environmental justice. So I'll dive a little bit deeper into each of these topics, but the environmental justice movement launched in 1982 with the sit-ins in Warren County, North Carolina, but didn't really see any significant federal progress until the early 1990s. But I'm going to back up a little bit and set the stage for the environmental justice movement. So although the Warren County sit-ins were the first instance of an environmental protest by people of color that generated widespread national attention, it was not the first time people of color organized to oppose environmental threats. The civil rights movement set the stage for protesting racial discrimination and widespread inequality across racial lines in America. In 1968, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. joined Black sanitation workers in Memphis to protest polluted and hazardous working conditions after 2 garbage collectors were crushed to death by a malfunctioning truck. This strike marks one of the first organized efforts to mobilize around economic and environmental injustices. These efforts in the 1960s paved the path for the sit-in in Warren County in 1982, when the state government decided that the county would make a perfect home for 6,000 truckloads of soil laced with toxic PCBs. The dump trucks were headed to a hazardous waste site in a small African-American community. Protesters were concerned that the contaminated soil would leach into their drinking water supplies, and so they organized a series of protests, marches, and nonviolent sit-ins. The community really mobilized around this effort, but they ended up losing, and the toxic waste was deposited in their landfill. This instance of protesting against this toxic waste dump is widely regarded as the beginning of the environmental justice movement. These protests sparked environmental justice activists to look at other instances of similar injustice. Investigations and reports from the late 80s showed a very similar pattern. Pollution-producing facilities were often cited in poor communities of color. The United Church of Christ served as a leading organization in launching the environmental justice movement. After the Warren County protests, the UCC Commission on Racial Justice conducted a landmark study called Toxic Wastes and Race. They were looking specifically at the statistical relationship between the location of a hazardous waste site and the racial and socioeconomic composition of host communities nationwide. This study found that over 15 million African Americans, 8 million Hispanics, and half of all Asian and Pacific Islanders and Native Americans resided in communities with at least one abandoned or uncontrolled toxic waste site. The UCC study was the first of its kind to address the issues of race, class, and the environment on a national level. The study did look at socioeconomic status and some other factors as well, but it concluded that race was the single most important factor in determining where toxic waste facilities were sited in the United States. It also made clear that the placing of these facilities in communities of color was the intentional result of local, state, and federal land use policies. So after this report was released in the late 80s, the environmental justice movement really took off. In 1991, the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit was held in Washington, D.C. This 4-day conference was attended by several hundred Native American, African American, Latino, and Asian Pacific environmentalists. The summit produced 2 really important documents. One was called Principles of Environmental Justice, and the other is called Call to Action. These are documents that have helped to lay the foundation for grassroots environmental justice organizations ever since. They outlined 17 principles of environmental justice that we still follow today. In the 90s, the environmental justice movement also picked up national recognition from the US government. In 1990, an environmental equity work group was formed under the EPA administrator. In 1992, this work group made the recommendation that an Office of Environmental Equity should be established in the EPA. It was founded in 1992. It is now called the Office of Environmental Justice. It changed its name in 1994. So this office that is still an important part of the EPA today has been around since 1992. In 1994, President Clinton signed Executive Order 12898 to focus federal attention on the environmental and human health conditions of minority and low-income populations, with the goal of achieving environmental protection for all communities. This order established an interagency working group on environmental justice and directed federal agencies to develop strategies on how to identify and address the disproportionately adverse human health and environmental effects of programs, policies, and activities on minority and low-income populations. No real significant federal progress has been made in many years, though. Under the Bush administration in the early 2000s, the EPA shifted the focus of environmental justice away from emphasizing minority and low-income populations to focus on environmental justice for all, which left many minority and low-income populations sorry. Sorry. Without an environmental advocate. So sorry, the pollen has really gotten to me lately.
Okay, take your time.
In 2009, Obama's administration recommitted to environmental justice, but no bills were passed focusing on expanding environmental justice protections. Despite the lack of a strong federal response, some states have made significant environmental justice legislation in recent years. On this map, you can see that the states in blue are states that have enacted environmental justice legislation. The states in pink are states that have pending environmental justice legislation, and the states in yellow are states that have no environmental justice legislation. So you might be curious about what's happening here in Georgia. In February of this year, so just a couple of months ago, a new bill called HB 432 was proposed by 6 Democrats in the House of Representatives. The bill is titled Georgia Environmental Justice Act of 2021, and it's the first proposed legislation in Georgia that directly addresses environmental injustice. The proposed bill would create an Environmental Justice Commission and provide the commission with the authority to intervene in proceedings before state agencies related to the environmental matters affecting people of color and people from low-income communities. So this is really, really important state legislation, and we would love to see it pass. It didn't make any progress this year, but we're hoping in the 2022 legislative session to see something happen with this bill, as this is really important for the environmental justice work that we want to do here in Georgia. So I would take a few minutes to talk about some of the environmental justice priorities that are identified by the EPA. One of the top priorities is access to clean and safe drinking water that meets all of the health standards. So many of you might be familiar with the Flint, Michigan water crisis that really shed light on water injustices facing underserved communities and the need to make this an environmental justice priority. For those who might not know, for many centuries, the Flint River was a dumping site for toxic chemicals from many of the industries that lined the river, from the city's waste treatment plant, and from agricultural and urban runoff. In 2014, the city government made the decision to stop piping in water from Detroit to save money, and so they started piping in water from the Flint River. They did not treat the water, and the acidity in the water eroded people's pipes and leached dangerous levels of lead into thousands of homes. And so this really shed light again on the clean drinking water problems that we have in America. I think we take it for granted so often that we can just go to the faucet and get water that is safe to drink, but that is not the case. And that's not even the case here in Georgia. In a little bit, I'll talk about the problems with coal ash and the ways that coal ash is contaminating drinking water in communities in Georgia. So this is a top environmental justice priority that the EPA is seeking to address right now. A second top EPA environmental justice priority is to improve air quality standards around the country. Those living with bad air quality face a range of serious health harms. Air pollution can cause respiratory and cardiovascular diseases, can also cause more frequent asthma attacks, heart attacks, strokes, and lung cancer. People of color are 1.5 times more likely to live in an area with poor air quality. Another important environmental justice priority is the cleanup of hazardous waste sites. In 1980, the EPA established the Superfund program to clean up contaminated areas resulting from the mismanagement of hazardous waste. This was a response to a couple of environmental disasters, including what's called Love Canal, which was a mismanaged landfall in Niagara Falls, New York, that left residents exposed to toxic chemicals, including a leukemia-causing benzene. Currently, there are over 1,300 sites on the National Priorities List, which is a list that guides further investigations and Superfund remediation efforts. So again, often these waste sites are not dispersed evenly in our communities. Often those most at risk of living near them are low income or racial or ethnic minorities. Hazardous waste sites are not only impacting the environment and harming ecosystems, killing wildlife, but they are also associated with a number of adverse health effects and can contribute to water pollution as well. And then lastly, I just want to name climate change as an environmental justice priority, because although climate change is a threat to all of us, we know that some groups, particularly minority and low-income communities, face the greatest risks associated with climate change. Climate change is going to lead to more extreme weather events and more intense extreme weather events, and disadvantaged communities are particularly at risk when these events happen, because they might live in Housing with old infrastructure that is more vulnerable to power outages or water image and water issues and damage. Residents of these communities might lack access to healthcare if they're harmed in the weather events. They also might not have transportation to escape from extreme weather events or home insurance or other resources to relocate or rebuild after a disaster. Additionally, increasing temperatures and changes in precipitation also impact agriculture and food supply. This most negatively impacts communities who don't already have access to fresh and healthy foods. Over 19 million Americans are living in what we consider to be a food desert, which is if you live more than a mile from a grocery store in a city or more than 10 miles from a grocery store in a rural area. And this is only going to get worse as we experience climate-related food shortages. So what does this mean for us in Georgia, and how can we get involved in the work of environmental justice? So I want to start like waste that is left over from burning coal for electricity. It contains toxins like arsenic, mercury, lead, and other heavy metals. Currently, the majority of coal ash is being stored in 29 unlined coal ash ponds across Georgia. These ponds are leaking into the groundwater below and getting into people's domestic wells and into their drinking water. And most of these, you can see on this map here, the blue dots are the locations of the 29 unlined coal ash ponds around Georgia. And the red dots are the locations of 6 landfills that are accepting coal ash. So you can see that a lot of these blue dots, so locations of the ponds, are adjacent to our water systems, like around the Chattahoochee watershed, near the Savannah River on the coast, and near the Flint River in South Georgia. And so this is a big and both environmental and public health concern. We're also accepting a lot of coal ash from out of state. This is because it's relatively cheap. It's actually cheaper for landfills in Georgia to accept coal ash than it is for them to accept household garbage. So a lot of coal plants in other states are sending their coal ash here. And so this is a big problem we're facing. About 19 of these 29 ponds are currently being excavated, but the remaining 10 have plans to just be capped in place. So basically what that means is that instead of like removing the coal ash and either lining the pond or taking the coal ash to a landfill, they are just taking all of the water away and then capping everything in place, which is basically still leaving the coal ash sitting on top of aquifers and on top of the ground where it is leaching below into groundwater. And this begs an important environmental justice question of why some communities and some coal ash plants are being excavated while others are being capped in place, and those communities are going to continue to face this issue. There's a new documentary out that's called Saving Juliet. It was just released this year, and it follows the story of folks in Juliet, Georgia. They are, that community is next to a coal ash plant shearer, and they found out at town hall meetings that the coal ash pond there is sitting on top of the same aquifer where they get their drinking water from. City and county water lines do not go to Juliet, and so they're all relying on domestic wells, and their well water was contaminated with toxins from the coal ash. They actually found out through testing that the well water tested many times over the California legal limit for hexavalent chromium, which is a known carcinogen and heavy metal connected to coal ash. And so a lot of folks in this community were getting sick with cancer and other illnesses, and we're not sure why, and then found out that their drinking water was contaminated. So they went to the they went to the Capitol to protest, but no significant coal ash legislation has been passed in Georgia in the last couple of years. There are 2 bills on the table right now. One would require the full excavation of ponds, which is really what we're pushing for, is for all of these ponds to be excavated and the coal ash to be taken to lined pits in the landfills. The other bill would just require monitoring for 50 years on these coal ash ponds. So that's like the very bare minimum of what we would want to see happen. The second environmental justice priority that I want to talk about in Georgia has to do with energy burden, which is the percentage of gross household income spent on energy costs. And I actually have another video to share about energy burden.
As a senior in the community, a senior has to make a decision. Do I buy my medication or do I pay my energy bill?
There are people that their power bills are running like $200 to $300 per month due to the fact that we have to have Georgia Power in order to turn on our heat or to cook. And that gets kind of hard for them.
This is the Fulton Atlanta Community Action Authority. Our motto is to help people help themselves. Unless you're really, really down and out, you don't seek a program like FACA.
Where I live, the majority of the residents are senior citizens on fixed incomes. The bills are running extremely high, and it gets difficult for them to pay it. Some have gotten disconnected.
To get it shut back on or cut back on, it's costing maybe twice the amount of the bill.
I'm Wanda Adio. I'm the Executive Director of Overview Incorporated. We're a community action agency in Milledgeville, Georgia, and we serve 9 counties. And it's just a struggle, especially during the winter months for the elderly, which we serve. So a good bit of them come in with disconnection notices. And so they're in threat of not having heat during the winter.
I am Pastor Larry Hill, pastor of the Word of God Ministries. Here we provide spiritual guidance for our members as well as residents throughout the community. A resident parent has to choose whether they pay their light bill, their energy bill, or put food on the table. So as a pastor, that is an energy crisis to me.
It would be nice to see Georgia Power to put funds into energy efficiency measures for these homes. That makes a more long-term effect.
If I had the opportunity to actually talk to the commissioners, I would plead with them to please consider those individuals who cannot afford high energy costs.
I would like the Public Service Commission to take a fair look at what Georgia Power is doing to the people.
So I like that video because I think it does a good job telling the story of energy burden, and it makes the really powerful point that energy burden is such a huge equity issue because folks are having to decide if they're going to pay their electric bill or if they're going to put food on the table for their kids. So again, this energy burden is not dispersed equally among communities. An energy burden above 6% is considered unaffordable, but the national average for low-income households is 8.6%. And African-American households experience a median energy burden of 64% greater than white households, and Latino households have a median burden that is 24% higher than white households. Like they mentioned in the video, Georgia is one of the most energy expensive states, and Atlanta ranks 4th highest in the country in median energy burden levels. Here in Atlanta, energy burden is acute among low-income African-American and renter households and is concentrated in just 6 of 25 zip codes, mostly in West Side and Southwest Atlanta. So some of the factors affecting energy burden include the fact that we are in the South, and so we do have temperatures that are on average higher than the rest of the country. We also rank 41st in per capita income. Like the video said, we lack state investments and good energy efficiency programs, and our homes are generally larger than in other parts of the country. One of the issues with Georgia Power is that every 3 years, they file a rate case with the Public Service Commission where they ask for adjustments to the fees and changes and charges that they impose on their customers. And in 2019, the Public Service Commission granted Georgia Power's request to raise the base rates over the next 3 years and to impose a fee to be used for coal ash cleanup. So we're paying a fee on our electric bills for coal ash cleanup. So basically a problem that they created, it's something that we're paying for on our bills. Georgia Power likes to say that we have one of the lowest rates in the country, which is true, but we don't pay rates, we pay bills. And so even though we have relatively low rates, because of all of these additional fees, we're ending up paying one of the most, like the highest energy bills in the country. So our monthly base fee increased by $2 in 2021 and will increase by another $2 in 2020. So normally, an electricity customer can kind of control how much you're paying on utility bills because you can, turn the air conditioning off or turn the heat off to lower your bill. But with the high mandatory fees, this really reduces our ability to control our energy costs. Another issue that is affecting energy burden in Georgia is Plant Vogtle, which is a nuclear power plant in Burke County. In 2009, 2 additional nuclear reactors were approved for construction and estimated that they would be completed in 2017. But there were a series of setbacks. The original contractor went bankrupt, and then Georgia Power took over this project. But these 2 units are still under construction, so they're more than 5 years behind schedule and $4 billion over budget. But Georgia Power has already been collecting on this project. They've already collected over $2 billion from their customers, most of which is in stakeholder profit. So you'll see on your energy bill something called the Nuclear Construction Cost Recovery Rider, and that's what this is going towards. This is a surcharge that covers the financing costs associated with this nuclear project. And this is a huge burden on communities because not only do individuals pay it on their bills, your congregation pays it on their bills, your kid's school pays it on their bills. So you're really paying for it like many times over. So because you pay it yourself, if you like tithe to your church, you're helping to pay for it. If you give to your kid's school, you're helping to pay for it. So this is a huge burden on communities because nonprofits, places of worship, hospitals, everybody is paying this extra fee. And this is really contributing to Georgia's residents' energy burden. So some of the things that we can do about this specific issue is hold Georgia Power accountable for this project. Pursuing clean energy options like solar and investing in energy efficiencies for all customers. I wanted to highlight a little bit about some of the organizations that are involved in the work of equity and environmental justice here. So one that you might be familiar with is the Partnership for Southern Equity. They work to address inequities in our communities, and they have a program called the Just Energy Program that looks specifically at energy burden and working to reduce energy burden in communities in Georgia. A second organization I want to highlight is the Climate Reality Project, which works to address climate change and environmental justice. They have a number of chapters around the country, including one in Atlanta. And they give members a chance to execute plans to address climate injustices at a local level. The Southern Environment Law Center works to advance equal access to a healthy environment by protecting the basic right to clean air, clean water, and a livable climate, and by preserving our region's national resources and biodiversity. Environment Georgia also works to take action on policy and advocacy, and their solutions work at both the local, state, and federal level. Their priorities are also clean air, clean water, clean energy, and climate change. And then the Imani group is actually the group that Reverend Brendalyn Bozeman, who will be speaking next week on environmental racism. She's the founder of this group, and they work to dismantle racism, sexism, classism, and they work specifically also on environmental justice. So I'm really glad that you'll get to hear from her next week and learn a little bit more about what her group does. To wrap things up, I want to talk about some opportunities for congregations. So you all have an amazing green team at UUCA. So I'm so glad that you're already involved in this work. We are relaunching our green team coaching program right now. So if you're interested in working with a GIPL coach for 12 months of strategic planning to kind of identify some priorities for your congregation and ways that you can take action and kind of build out those steps. This is an opportunity right now to be in a new coalition of green team coaching congregations. A really important way that you can reduce carbon impact and help to address the energy burden that I just talked about is by investing in energy efficiencies. And so I'm glad that you mentioned earlier the PowerWise grant that you have received and the energy efficiency projects that are already happening, because this is an incredible way to make a big impact, not only on reducing carbon impact and carbon reduction, but also on contributing to the clean air economy, which has really significant impacts for our communities as well. We also do advocacy trainings, so you can learn more about the legislative process and how to set up lobby meetings. If you're interested in getting involved at an advocacy level, we would love to talk to you about how that works and help you identify some policy priorities and bills that you would like to take action on. We can also host a film screening event. So if you're interested in watching a documentary such as the Saving Juliet one that I mentioned earlier, we could do the film screening and couple that either with a discussion or a letter writing campaign if you want to get involved in advocacy in that way. And then lastly, I just want to note the work of Drawdown Georgia. We're working closely with Drawdown Georgia, which is a statewide initiative to reduce Georgia's carbon impact by 1/3 by 2030. They've identified 20 solutions in 5 sectors, from electricity to buildings and materials, food and agriculture, land sinks, and transportation. And these solutions are aimed at carbon reduction. But I want to note that a really important part of their work is their beyond carbon impacts. So they have considered for each of these solutions how each solution will impact other societal priorities such as equity, the larger environment, public health, and the economy. And so I think this is important for the work of environmental justice, because again, we need to remember that all of our climate solutions and what we're doing to protect the climate is not just about protecting the earth, but it's about protecting communities. So I want to just share one example of what this looks like in their work. So to use the example of rooftop solar, so, this is a great climate solution. It helps to advance the clean air economy, helps to reduce carbon emissions. But you can see in this beyond carbon field that they've taken into consideration the ways that displacing fossil fuels improves air quality and generates environmental and public health benefits, that it also creates jobs and increases local and state employment. And they take into consideration both the positive and negative effects on the community. So they have highlighted that there's an upfront cost to solar. That's something to watch, especially for under-resourced groups. And so I think it's really important that their work highlights these beyond carbon impacts, because I think this sets a perfect example of the ways that environmental and social justice work together, and the ways that justice work is truly intersectional. So that's all that I have for my presentation. These are the questions that I would like us to discuss in breakout rooms. So I'm gonna also drop them in the chat so you don't have to worry about writing them down or anything. So I think I'll stop sharing my screen now. Turn it back over to you, June, to send people into breakout rooms, and I'll get these questions in the chat so that we have access to them to talk about.
I'm opening the breakout rooms right now.
There were 5. I'd love to hear just a little bit about what y'all talked about. And then I would just really welcome kind of a group discussion and an opportunity to ask any questions from the presentation that you had. So maybe somebody from breakout room 1 would like to share first.
Who was that? I don't remember what breakout room I was in.
Oh, let's see. Julie, Lizanne, and Sue, I think we're in room 1.
Oh, okay, okay. Sue, Julie, Carrie, anybody want to, because you know me, I'll always, open my big mouth. We had a good discussion. A lot of it was about energy. We talked some about solar power and how good it would be for this area, but how hard it is to access, especially for lower income families. We talked also at the end, we talked about our faith and how important belonging to a faith that has part of one of their principles, an important article of their faith, the 7th principle, which is support of the earth and indigenous communities. So yeah, it was a very good discussion, I thought. Anybody else have anything to add? We complained about the PSC. I invited people to come down and protest next time. So yeah, I don't know. Anybody else?
But yeah, a little bit more about the 7th principle. It's support for the interdependent, something like this, the interdependent web of all things, which is interpreted to mean support of the environment, that, we're all, the plants, the animals, the earth are all together in it. And we're all, I see it as we're all part of, one big web. And what affects all, and and the earth and the like Liz had said, indigenous people, all people, we're all part of one big web, which no other faith I know of has a principle like that that's specifically environmental.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love that. I think that's so important to this work and speaks to the intersectionality of everything. Thank you, Breakout Group 1. Breakout Room 2, which was my room, Lee and Patricia and Ines. I'm sorry if I just butchered your name.
Enos, yeah.
Enos, yeah.
Lee, go for it.
Well, we kind of got off to a little slow start because we're trying to figure out what questions to go for. And it kind of evolved from why do we have hope or not? And so we explored that some, and I expressed hope that because of a lot of the things that are going on with these different groups and different organizations that are really working very hard to raise awareness and making things happen and reduce inequities and all that. Well, a lot of what Hannah talked about. So that was great. And then we talked about this, the problems with Georgia Power and the Public Service Commission and those and problems that like Enos had trying to tap into the solar program that Georgia Power offers, and it's apparently next to impossible for archaic reasons that only Georgia Power knows, I'm sure. Pat gave a great example of her solar panels and how it's reduced their rates so much, and it's just it's incremental, but it's one of those things that just has to take place for a lot of people. Anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Lee. Anybody else from the group want to share? See, we've got a comment in the chat that home solar is not in the interest of Georgia Power. Yep, it's definitely true. Mm-hmm. Group 3, Claire, Kay, and Patrick.
What'd you say? Go for it for me. Okay. We spoke a lot about some of our frustrations with sort of more systemic level, sort of like, sorry guys, I'm gonna have a hard time phrasing this, long day. Sort of in unwillingness to look at issues systemically and the temptation to blame them on individuals, sort of thinking about how, oh, individuals can turn off their air conditioning, but Georgia Power still causes this strain to be put on low-income families. We also spent some time talking about what hope we have for Georgia, thinking about the fact that hopefully we'll continue to become a little bit more purple, a little bit more blue, and be able to pass more of these environmental legislation. Yeah. Kay and Patrick, did I get everything?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, sounds good.
I think we also talked about the amount of frustration and the amount of not full direction on what to do or who to talk to make something happen. That it was that in itself is very frustrating and overwhelming. But on the other hand, we have a lot of people here in this meeting tonight and other meetings probably that I think really speaks to how important this issue is and that we can do something. We just have to find a way to get together and keep working at it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that can definitely be an overwhelming part of all of this, and we would love to help you out with this. So we could definitely come back and do an advocacy training and help you identify some of those policy priorities and kind of talk about how to set up lobby meetings, do letter writing campaigns, and give you some practical action steps for actually doing this work. Yeah, so thank you for sharing that. Group 4 was Bert, Carol, and John.
I nominate Carol to speak for our group.
Go Carol.
That's the power group.
John, I think you need to talk. You're the English major.
Call me the English major. Well, one of the highlights for me was just an exchange around the challenges of short-term justice when you still have significant needs for junk to be stored places and pollutants to be polluting until we get to a better solution for those things. And so Bert proposed, we sort of joked and threw around, putting the next dump in Buckhead on, West Paces Ferry or something like that. And actually wondering if that's the only way that you would start to get folks, if being intentionally unjust the other way would actually start to wake folks up to the ways decisions have been made along the path of least resistance. So that was a highlight for me. We talked about a couple of other things too, but that's probably good for us.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I think that's such an important point, that the reason why a lot of these policies haven't changed is because the people in power are not the ones who are being affected by it. So yeah, I like that idea. Group 5, Betsy, Hildegard, and Kay.
I guess I can talk about it. We spent most of our time talking about what we thought we as a congregation could do. So the first thing we talked about was lobbying, that perhaps there's a way we could hire or contribute to the pay of a professional lobbyist at the legislature who could alert us when certain things happen or need to happen, emails, calls, going down to committee meetings or whatever. And we already have, through the Climate Action Team and our Thursday night Social Justice Power Hour, we have ways of spreading the word within the congregation to make sure these things happen. So that was one. And then we also talked, and somebody said that the Presbyterian Church might already be involved in that, or various Presbyterian churches. So maybe there's another group that we can attach to that you might know about, Hannah, where it wouldn't cost us too much money to have this professional on-site person to help with that.
Yeah, I'm not sure of anything off the top of my head, but that's definitely something I could look into and see how we can get you connected.
Okay. And then the other thought we had was more about our new building. We talked about some of the things there, and we're pleased to hear that something was happening with the way the revamped electrical work was being done, so that we could, at a future point, could add solar collectors. And someone mentioned that there's they thought it was down at the Montana Grill. I think Betsy mentioned that there's a parking lot canopy that is all solar panels. And so the thought, it shades the cars and provides the power. So maybe sometime in the future, we'd be able to add something like that. It has a couple of advantages, also very visible to the rest of the community. So
yeah, I love that.
So I think those were the main things we talked about. Betsy or Kay, did I miss something?
So I mentioned the fact that other states, at least years ago at GA, there were tables that were, there are state lobbying, Unitarian state lobbying groups. And I think it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe we could find out more about that this year at GA. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thank you all so much for sharing and reporting back. I know we're getting close to the 9 o'clock hour, but I just want to invite anybody who wants to share some final thoughts, or if anybody has a question that they'd like to ask, I'd invite that now.
I will just add, in addition to the legislature that Hildegard mentioned, our group talked about the power in the Public Service Commission in Georgia, and how close we came to, in the election, but didn't quite make it this time in getting someone on that commission that is more progressive. And so I just put out there that, there's a lot that goes on there that is related to energy consumption and the inequities of that in Georgia. So as we put that in the mix of our plans.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The Public Service Commission, like you said, plays such an important role. And we always like to say it's like the most important elected body that nobody knows anything about. And so I think just like telling people about the Public Service Commission is so important, because so many folks have no idea the power that they hold and how it really impacts all of our lives. So.
Hannah, do you know if I know that our state legislature is not all that savvy in terms of connecting with constituents, but is there any type of automatic alert system when subcommittees set hearings for environmental justice related? Or do you just have to know somebody and have them call you and tell you, hey, it's coming up?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure entirely how that all works. I know that there are some organizations like Environment Georgia and some of the ones that I mentioned that do send out like action alerts and try to like make people aware, but you've got to be like on their list. So let me look into either if there's something automatic that happens in the legislature, or if it's a matter of kind of getting on the right email list from some of these like environmental advocacy groups. But I can definitely look into that and let y'all know how you can start to get some of those action alerts.
The organization that I belong to, there's lobbyists that's what they do. That's what you pay them for. So they keep their, they know where those things are coming from, and so you pay them, and then you get on the list of those people that get notified when those things get up. So that's there may be a more formal way, but that's how we all got the bulletins that we needed to run down to the Capitol and be at a meeting or, pay attention. And I can't believe that there aren't lobbyists working for other nonprofits and churches with that goal in mind of watching for that kind of stuff going by.
Well, they are, and you can watch the committee meetings online, and you can get their agenda and everything. I mean, it's all available online.
Yeah, I see that Lizanne put in the chat, Environment Georgia or Protect Georgia, as well as Sierra Club. So I'm glad that you mentioned Sierra Club as well, because I know that they do have folks who are, particularly working just on lobbying and advocacy. So I think that's another great place to plug in to get some of those alerts.
Hannah, as far as you mentioned, you listed categories of opportunities to work with GIPL in the coming year, and I'd sure like our green team to especially take advantage of the advocacy training. I think we could all, that would help us all. I think there are folks in the congregation, sounds like Kay and Betsy have some savvy, and I know Liz Ann does, but I think a lot more of us need to learn how the system works and how we can play it to whatever extent that we can.
I think that's a great next step, and we can definitely set that up for you. Cody's teaching that class, and he is well versed in advocacy and policy, so definitely can help point y'all in the right direction.
We also have a UUCA member who is a representative in the state legislature. So I'm guessing Nan Arak might be Senator. Sorry, thank you. Thank you, Betsy.
Yeah, that's a great connection.
So she may be willing to talk with some of us or do something.
She's done a kind of informal forum before. We should line her up to do one
again
for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, we're about running out of time, I think. So if 9 o'clock is the witching hour, I just want to say we had a great presentation by Hannah. I think it gave us all a lot to think about and plan for, and especially plan for meeting coming to the next Tuesday night meeting. The title of which is Impacts of Climate Change on Communities of Color, which will be presented by Reverend Rundlin Bozeman. It should be quite good. Look for an announcement in the weekly update, or probably the social justice update, about her and some explanation of what she's talking about.
Great.
Hannah, thanks so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Great to connect with all of you.
Will this be available to review again? It looks like it was recorded.
Yes, this will be on YouTube, on the UCA YouTube channel, and the link for next week's session and all upcoming sessions, but these specifically, the next two in this series, is the same as the one for tonight. Yes, thanks so much, Hannah. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
Good night. Thanks.